Daniel King knows nothing, does he? Absolutely nothing. And I think that's become more and more clear the deeper into this series that we've gone. He wants things to be true, but he doesn't have any actual knowledge about anything. He just has faith. He has beliefs. He is an immature child that really wishes that his imaginary friend was real. And sadly for him, that just doesn't seem to be the case, does it? So let's get back to him failing miserably. Here we go with part 2 of Daniel King's laughable failure on the ontological argument for God. And I trust nobody is surprised by that at all. Because this is really what we expect, that this is going to go as poorly as it is. But this time, I fear it gets even worse. We're just going to pick up right where we stopped off, and sadly, nothing improves. Daniel King is just assuming that he's right, making videos for people that he hopes agree that he's right, only to find out that nobody's paying any attention to him at all. He's just screaming out into the void and making a fool of himself. And I think we're going to find out exactly why he's such a laughingstock. Let's watch.
This being, who is perfect in all ways of being, including of existence, is the one we call God.
But here's the thing. This thing that we call God, that doesn't mean anything. I don't care if you call it Fred Flintstone. That doesn't get you anywhere. Your imaginary friend with all the made-up characteristics, what difference does any of that make? You can't point to an actual thing that you're calling God, nor can you show that your made-up deity has any of the characteristics that you are arbitrarily attaching to it. What is any of this supposed to mean? I don't care what you call a thing. I care if that thing actually exists. I care if you can prove it. And this is why the religious are so stupid. Knock it off.
The Christian concept of God is one of a God who is maximally great.
But your concept doesn't matter. This is exactly why we have to call them out on this crap. What you made up in your head, it doesn't mean anything. You haven't shown that your concept is indicative of anything in actual reality. My concept of invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies, that doesn't mean anything either unless the pixies are demonstrably real. Concepts are not realities. It doesn't matter if you have a concept. It matters if that concept is real. And of course, they don't give a damn about that, do they? Wonder why.
He is like a baseball player who bats 1,000 and always hits a home run. He's like a bowler who bowls a perfect 300 on every game. He's like a contestant who could not lose on a game show. If God was on Jeopardy, he would answer every question exactly.
But none of that stuff is demonstrably real. I mean, we shouldn't have to explain this, should we? Just because you made something up in your head, you ought to know that it's not reality, shouldn't you? Yet the religious apparently can't figure that out. It doesn't matter what your concept is. It doesn't matter what your belief is. It doesn't matter what your faith is. It matters only if any of those things actually exist in the real world that we all share, and you have to be able to back all of it up in some objective way. Yet they can't do any of that, can they? They can just make ridiculous claims and say, well, we have faith. But your faith doesn't matter. What the hell is wrong with these idiots?
The God of the Bible is such a God. He is perfectly powerful, omnipotent, perfectly knowledgeable, omniscient, perfectly good, omnibenevolent.
What?
Omnibenevolent.
You don't even know your own terminology. I swear I can't get through a single video of his without him stomping all over easy words in the English language. Of course, we know that he has absolutely no clue what a second take might be because he never uses one. That might actually take some work, and he doesn't want to do that. King is such a goddamn imbecile, and he proves it time after time after time. And he wonders why nobody likes him. Because he's a jackass.
And perfectly present, omnipresent.
What?
Omnipresent. Omnipresent.
I mean, I wouldn't do this if he didn't keep fucking up. I don't think I have ever seen an apologist in my life who was as incompetent and incoherent as Daniel King. There's something really wrong with this guy.
He is a perfect being because he possesses to the maximum level all the qualities that are better to have than to not have.
And how have you demonstrated that any real demonstrable God actually has any of those qualities at all? Not what you want to be true, but what you can prove is true. Because this is where all theists ultimately go off the rails. They are just playing make-believe in their heads. But wouldn't it really be nice? I don't know, don't care. Nice doesn't mean true. All they're doing is saying, well, my book says a thing that sounds really, really good to me, so it's all got to be true. No, you're an idiot. Your faith is utterly meaningless. This is why everybody laughs at you. You have to be better than this. Try.
And God is maximally great in all areas without slipping over into some logical fallacies. In the same way it is impossible to have a square circle or a married bachelor, it's impossible for God to create a rock so big that he cannot move it.
Some of those things, they're definitional. Everything that you are saying is just incoherent. A bachelor, by definition, cannot be married. They are mutually contradictory terms. God is just something that you made up in your head. You can't point to anything real and say, see that? That's God. Then you'd have to be able to study this real demonstrable existing God and see what its characteristics are actually like. You can't just define things into existence. That is not how reality works.
To speak of a perfect being is to speak of God.
I can do exactly what you're doing too. Invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies are perfect. Why? Because I said so. Therefore, they're gods. I mean, I'm just following your lead after all. I'm sure he won't like that, but who cares? You want your imaginary friend and no other, and if you can do that, so can I. So can Muslims. So can Hindus. So can Scientologists. Anybody can just make up something in their head and declare, with no evidence whatsoever, that it's just gotta be perfect because fifis. Because you're an idiot, Danny boy. Stop being stupid.
As existence is a perfection of being, then God must exist.
Then, as perfection is being, you said it after all, then that means that invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies must exist. I mean, we can go around and around and around in circles like this forever. It doesn't matter. If it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. The only way out is for one side to produce evidence that their farcical imaginary being is real, and the other side not being able to reciprocate. Now, I'm not pretending that mine is actually real. I know they're a complete farce, but he is. He is pretending that. He's got the burden of proof there, and he has no interest whatsoever in backing it up. He just really, really wants to believe. Because Daniel King is an imbecile. Really liking the idea doesn't matter, does it?
There are critics of the ontological proof. Galileo was one of Anselm's contemporaries, and he made fun of his argument by proposing an island that is greater than any other island that can be conceived.
I brought that up last time, and I'm not going to go into it again. I have yet to see anyone argue successfully that what Anselm said didn't also apply here, or with any number of other made-up ideas that get "it's perfect" stamped on them arbitrarily. Perfect isn't even a demonstrable thing. It's an idealized concept that you just made up in your head, which is all people like Anselm and King are doing. They really like the idea. But liking it, though, that doesn't make it true.
Since such an island does not exist, he said that God's existence couldn't be proved by Anselm's kind of reasoning. In a similar way, the existence of unicorns would be seen to invalidate Anselm's proof. My daughter is 9 years old, and like many little girls, she loves unicorns. One day we're talking about the perfect unicorn. According to my daughter, the perfect unicorn is pink and has a purple mane and a sparkling white horn.
The sad part is that King doesn't seem to comprehend that his daughter understands the problems better than he does. Perfect is just something that you make up in your head because it fills a particular emotional void. Now, I've got no idea at all if his daughter, and I really feel pretty bad that she has to grow up with this dipshit for a father, but I don't know if she really believes in unicorns or not. I wouldn't think most kids do. I think it's just something that they've got that's fun to believe, but I don't think they think it's real. At least I hope not. At least not as they grow. They want them to be real, or they want something to be real, even if it's just Santa Claus, but they can often figure out for themselves that it's not really there without having it explained. I don't see an awful lot of kids screaming, "But I really want it to be true." They understand that they got presents before, and they'll keep getting presents, Santa or no Santa, because Santa was never real to begin with. And it's really too bad that Danny Boy here can't get that through his thick head.
This unicorn would also be magical and sentient. Of course, no matter how perfectly my daughter imagines the perfect pet unicorn, my daughter knows that that unicorn does not exist.
The irony is palpable. This is why the religious are just so ridiculous. Because they can say things like this with a straight face and never understand that they've just shot themselves in the nuts. If the perfect magical unicorn isn't real, then your perfect magical God isn't real. It's not that hard to understand, except for complete idiots like Daniel King.
In the same way that the perfect island of Galileo might exist, but the perfect God of our thoughts can be proven to exist by the very fact that he can be imagined.
He just doesn't stop, does he? The perfect unicorn can be imagined. Your daughter is doing it. The perfect island can be imagined. Lots of stuff can be imagined. He's just making an exception for his own imaginary friend because it really appeals to him. I mean, seriously, how can he be this dumb? Every single video that we do of his, I keep saying, well, this is a new low in Daniel King's stupidity. And every single video thereafter, he tops himself. I mean, he really is just an imbecile. Please explain in the comments below how anybody can possibly be this dumb, because I really want to understand.
Anselm responded to his critics by replying that his proof only applied to concepts with necessary existence.
There is no such thing. So I can just reply that my perfect pixies, those exist necessarily. I mean, if you can do it for your God, I can do it too. This is just a bald rationalization. But I really want it to be true. But that doesn't make it true, does it? So let's take a step back for a second. How would one go about proving, not believing, not having faith, but proving that something has an actual necessary existence? Not that it says a thing in a book that you like, not that you have an emotional attachment to the idea, not that you have faith, but how would you prove that a God, any God, is actually necessarily existent? Now, keep in mind that the entire concept is just made up. Nothing is necessarily existent. The universe isn't necessarily existent. It's here because it's here, and it's only because it's here that anyone is around to take any notice of it. We are not necessary. We are here because conditions were right for us to be here. All of this is just a childish emotional demand for something that makes them happy, but that they can't actually show that any of the things that they claim are really real. He can say things about his imaginary friend all he wants, and I can just parrot the same things back about any crazy crap that I make up in my head. It's really all he's doing after all, right?
Anselm meant that his argument only works for God's existence because God's existence is necessary, certainly more necessary than the existence of a magical unicorn or a great island.
Well, that's your claim. That's the problem. All of this just devolves into empty claims and wishful thinking. Just because you think that God is necessary, that doesn't mean that God is actually necessary. It just means that you've got an overactive imagination. You still have to prove that this God of yours is real. And you notice how he's doing things out of order here. He's assuming that God is real and has all of the characteristics that he really likes. Thus, all of that somehow proves that God is real. Circular much? You can't just assume the existence of God to prove the existence of God. It just doesn't work that way.
A maximally great being grounds concepts like kindness and goodness that are part of perfection.
And when exactly did you ever prove that a maximally great being was real again? Because this is the ultimate downfall of Danny Boy's video. I know that he's not smart enough to figure it out, Anselm wasn't either. This is just assuming your beliefs before you prove your beliefs, and that doesn't get anyone anywhere. Of course, the religious, they don't really have a choice in any of that, do they? They have to assume that they're right because they want to be right, because this is all about confirming their already existing biases. So, because they desperately want to be right, that makes them right, and their beliefs prove that their beliefs are true. Except none of that makes any sense, does it?
A unicorn or an island could not be the ground of perfection except by having all perfection.
I know. I could just make fun of him for screwing up again, but that's getting a little bit boring because he does it so often. Now he's just wandering around defining his imaginary friend into existence because he really wants it to be true. So maybe I'll just let him ramble on for a little bit until he says something worth responding to. And I have a feeling this might go on for a while.
The perfect island, in order to be the perfect island, doesn't need all perfections, such as kindness or moral goodness, for instance. If it had all perfections, it would no longer be an island, but something else. In fact, it would be God.
Because you've just arbitrarily made up a definition for God that you like, assigned those characteristics to your imaginary friend, and then just declared that it has to be God because, it's God. The absurd stupidity of it all is just overwhelming. This is where you can just replace God with anything else. Just make it up in your head. Magical immaterial Bigfoot is all perfect because I say so. Therefore, it can do anything that your God can supposedly do because I say so. I mean, that's all they're really doing here, right? I really want it to be true. But that doesn't make any of it true. If we didn't already know it about Daniel King, we might start to doubt his sanity and critical thinking skills, right? But why would we do that?
The ontological proof only works for God because there can only be one maximally great being or entity in existence.
First off, says who? Second off, who says it's your God? This is just an idiot arbitrarily deciding how he wants to define his imaginary friend. But that doesn't make any of it real. And earlier today, this kind of thing came up again as a Christian, a Catholic to be more specific, showed up on a forum, made all kinds of claims based on his own Catholic theology. That it just has to be true and accepted as true universally because he just can't conceive of a world where it just isn't so. The religious have a real problem getting beyond their own theological bullshit. It makes it really hard to have an intelligent conversation with them, doesn't it?
Alvin Plantinga an American philosopher, has offered a robust modern defense of the ontological proof.
No, he hasn't. He's doing the exact same thing that King is doing. But I just want it to be true. Basically, all he does is say that if God exists in any possible world, and that's a pretty big if there, but if God exists anywhere, then God exists everywhere, because all of these entirely unsupported bullshit attributes that Christians have just stapled onto their God says it has to be true. It is assuming things based on faith that have not been demonstrated in reality. The only way to argue for any version of the ontological argument, Plantinga's or otherwise, is to assume that the beliefs of Christians are remotely believable. And I don't think you can do it. Well, the Bible says. Well, I don't care what the Bible says. You haven't proven that yet. This isn't going to work as an article of faith. You have to have evidence. Independent, objective, corroboratory evidence that any of this crap is actually true, and the religious have nothing.
His argument is as follows. Premise A, it is possible that a maximally great being exists.
Really? Prove it, because maximally great isn't even defensible as a concept in actual reality. It's an idealized notion that he just made up in his head. This is why philosophy is bullshit in many of these cases. You can't just philosophize what you think might be true into anything that is actually true in the real world. So I'm just calling bullshit on premise A because this is just word salad. It doesn't actually mean anything.
Premise B, if it is possible that a maximally great being exists, then a maximally great being exists in some possible world.
That is bullshit. If it is possible that invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies exist, then invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies exist in some possible world. You want to buy that one? Just saying that a thing is possible. That doesn't tell us if it is probable, and it most certainly doesn't tell us if it is true. This is where Plantinga is trying to smuggle his theology into the mix, and we've talked about this before. Just because you really want it to be true, that doesn't make it true. I am not remotely interested in what could be. I care about what is, and the religious have no way to get from A to B without a whole lot of rationalizing and wishful thinking.
Premise C, if a maximally great being exists in some possible world, then it exists in every possible world.
That is still not justifiable. Every single premise has failed the rational sniff test. Miserably. Mostly because he's just stringing words together and thinking that will make something true in reality. That is not what philosophy is for. All the syllogisms in the world won't tell you anything defensibly true about the characteristics of a new species of wombat. You actually have to go look at the wombat first. This is just philosophy being misused. And I trust nobody is surprised.
Conclusion, if a maximally great being exists in every possible world, then it exists in the actual world.
Your premises are all bullshit. Therefore, your conclusion is bullshit because you've never shown that any of it is even reasonable to accept as true. Granted, these people just don't care. Well, I've got this image in my head of this deity, and I really want my deity to be just like this. I can't prove that it is. I can't prove that it's real at all. But it makes me feel really, really good to believe it. Therefore, it's true. But this is absolutely, positively not how any of this works. Sorry. Stop being stupid.
In his discussion of the ontological argument, Plantinga brings in a hypothesis of modern physics that proposes the existence of multiple or parallel universes. He argues that the existence of God is not logically contradictory and is therefore possible.
Possible doesn't mean true. Possible doesn't mean actual. Because here's where a lot of theists go wrong. I mean, one place among many. When they think about other universes, they're not thinking about entirely separate entities. They are thinking about different variations of our own. Well, what happens if you went left instead of right at the intersection? stuff like that. Mostly, I think it's because they just aren't that creative, except when it comes to their imaginary friends. They don't have much of an imagination outside of making up fanciful father figures in the sky, and even there, they're all just variations on humans, just immensely powerful. It's like these people have some kind of father fetish from their childhood, where they're just stuck in an infinite loop, looking up to someone that they really want to take care of them because they're afraid to exist in the real world on their own. As I think this becomes very, very clear, this comes down to a lot of people who've never really grown up. They are trapped in some kind of subadult emotional cage that they never want to advance from. And that means these people are real idiots.
God being a logical possibility, it is possible that he exists in one of the possible universes proposed by multiple universe theory.
That is not how any of that works. Even if there is a God of some kind in some universe out there, and we have no way to verify that there even are any other universes, the math makes sense, but we have no way to test it. But even if it was true, that doesn't mean that said God would have access to any other universes out there. Remember, people like Danny Boy have just made all of this up in their heads, and then they wrapped it in a load of philosophical bullshit so they just feel better about themselves when everybody else is laughing at them, and deservedly so. Luckily, we're getting close to the end of this because my brain is definitely hurting after beating my head against the endless stupidity that is Daniel King.
Since it is possible for God to exist in one possible universe, then being maximally great, God must also exist in every universe, including ours.
Yeah, but that's not how that works either. Remember, all of this is just made up. There is no evidence that any maximally great anything, God or otherwise, actually exists. This is something that they just invented for emotional reasons, not because it is in any way reasonable to accept. This is where we get right back to the basic problem, that absolutely every bit of this is just, but I really want it to be true. It's where concept, and gods are just concepts, crashes into reality with no way to logically get from one to the other. Again, this is not how philosophy works. You can't just philosophize something in your head and then just say, well, it means it's actually so. No, it doesn't. Stop being dumb.
As a consolation to my daughter, Plantinga's thinking makes it possible for my daughter's unicorn to exist in some world that multiple universe theory makes possible. But since a unicorn is not a maximally great being, it does not exist in every possible world.
Unless it's a maximally great unicorn. Hell, if you can just make things up, so can she. Honestly, do these people even listen to themselves? I doubt it the more that I hear Daniel King. I still feel really bad for his daughter, who's got to live with this dipshit as a father.
When I think about God, in all the maximum perfection of his greatness and goodness, just the fact that I can think about him in this way tells me that God is there.
Unlike your brain. So anyway, there we go. Danny Boy just making a complete fool of himself once again on a video that has gotten just 29 views, and even the atheists, they're not even bothering to show up to tear this apart. I think we're at a point of diminishing returns here. It's been fun to laugh at this moron, considering just how ignorant he is and how little he actually knows about anything, but I really don't know just how much fun this is anymore. Next time, he's going to do morality, which I want to do, and after that, he takes a side path on, well, why do atheists reject God's moral law? Which I guess could be interesting. But after that, hell if I know. Let me know in the comments if you want me to keep doing this, because, I don't know, it seems like we're doing the same thing over and over and over again. I just keep looking at it like I'm kicking a developmentally disabled kid, which probably isn't that far from the truth. He has no real following, he has absolutely no knowledge of anything, but he's still marching along in a non-existent parade, pretending that everybody's just following along, when absolutely nobody's paying any attention to him at all. Well, anybody but us, that is. What do you think about the ontological argument? Let me know down in the comments and let's have a conversation, one that's hopefully a little more intelligent than anything Daniel King says. I'd love to find somebody who has a decent take on it that wasn't all, but God just has to be real. Come without your faith and preconceptions. I'd like to have a conversation with you, but I doubt we'll ever come up with that, will we? And that's kind of sad, isn't it?